Yes, God does answer prayer, and yes, God can heal someone if he chooses to, absolutely.
The family says they don't have anything against doctors, but they believe the girl's illness was a test of faith. When the medical examiner said Madeline's body would be taken away for an autopsy, her mom told him it was unnecessary and that the little girl would be alive the following day.
In the quiet town of Weston, Wisconsin, an 11-year-old girl named Madeline Cara Newman was dying. For weeks, she had been growing weaker, dehydrating, and losing weight at an alarming rate. Her parents, Dale and Leilani Newman, watched their youngest daughter deteriorate before their eyes. But instead of rushing her to the hospital, they gathered friends and family around her bedside to pray. What happened next would divide a community. It challenged the boundaries between religious freedom and parental responsibility, and ultimately led to one of the most controversial criminal cases in Wisconsin's history. This is the story of Cara Newman. And make sure you stay till the very end, where I break down exactly why the parents did what they did. This is a case that forces us to confront difficult questions about faith, medicine, and the lengths parents will go to protect what they believe is best for their children. Dale and Leilani Newman seem like any other American family living in Wisconsin. They owned and operated a small coffee shop in the town of Weston, a close-knit community where everyone knew their neighbors. The Newmans had 4 children together, and by all accounts, they were loving, devoted parents who took an active role in their children's lives. Cara, their youngest, was a bright 11-year-old who helped out at the family business and was known for her cheerful disposition. She was the kind of child who would light up a room when she walked in, always ready with a smile or a helping hand. Her siblings adored her. She seemed to have that special quality that youngest children often possess of bringing joy to everyone around her. Now, the Newman family identified as Pentecostals, though they didn't belong to any specific church or organized religious institution. Their faith was deeply personal and central to how they lived their lives. They believed in the power of prayer, in divine healing, and in the idea that God could cure any ailment if approached with sufficient faith and devotion. But this wasn't always the case for the family. In the earlier years, the Newmans had taken a more conventional approach to healthcare. All of their children had been born in hospitals and received standard medical care, including vaccinations. Dale had even seen a chiropractor regularly for about 10 years to treat chronic back pain. But somewhere along the way, their relationship with traditional medicine began to change. The turning point came when Dale experienced what he believed was a miraculous healing of his back pain through prayer alone. This experience profoundly impacted both Dale and Leilani's worldview. They began to see conventional medicine not as a complement to their faith, but as something that could actually interfere with God's plan for their lives. In their minds, seeking medical treatment had become tantamount to putting the doctor before God, which they viewed as a form of idolatry and sin. Now, I'm quite a religious person myself. That's obviously taking it to the extreme. Don't you agree? This shift in perspective wasn't uncommon in certain religious communities. The idea that faith alone could heal any condition, and that seeking medical intervention demonstrated a lack of trust in God's power. And for the Newmans, this belief became not just a preference, but a fundamental principle that would guide all their future decisions about health and wellness. Dale would later testify that he genuinely believed his family's overall health had improved since they stopped consulting doctors. In his mind, their decision to rely solely on prayer for healing wasn't just spiritually sound, it was practically effective. This conviction would prove to be tragically misguided, but it's important to understand that the Newmans weren't acting out of neglect or indifference toward their children's well-being. They genuinely believed they were doing what was best for their daughter. The family lived in a community where their beliefs, while perhaps not mainstream, weren't entirely unusual. They had friends and extended family members who shared similar views about faith healing and the power of prayer. This created something of an echo chamber where their convictions were regularly reinforced by those around them. When crisis struck, they would turn to this same community for support and guidance. In early March 2008, Cara began experiencing symptoms that in retrospect were classic signs of type 1 diabetes. She was constantly thirsty, drinking water almost compulsively throughout the day. She was urinating frequently, sometimes having accidents that were unusual for a child her age. She complained of feeling tired and weak, and her appetite began to diminish noticeably. Type 1 diabetes, also known as juvenile diabetes, is an autoimmune condition where the body's immune system attacks and destroys the insulin-producing cells in the pancreas. Without insulin, the body cannot properly process glucose, leading to dangerously high blood sugar levels. If left untreated, the condition progresses to diabetic ketoacidosis, a life-threatening compilation. I don't know how to say the keto word properly, I'm just going to call it keto acid. The symptoms Cara was experiencing was textbook signs of this progression, but to her parents, they seemed like nothing more than a common childhood illness. Children get sick all the time, of course, and the early symptoms of diabetes can easily be mistaken for the flu or other minor ailments. The Newmans had no reason to suspect their daughter was developing a serious chronic condition, and what made the situation particularly tragic was how gradually the symptoms developed. This wasn't a sudden dramatic illness that would have immediately alarmed any parent. Instead, it was a slow deterioration that could easily be attributed to a variety of minor causes. Cara might have been tired because she wasn't sleeping well. She might be drinking more water because the weather was changing. She might have less appetite because she was going through a growth spurt. For several weeks, the family went about their normal routine. Cara continued to help out at the coffee shop when she fell up to it, though her parents noticed she seemed to need more rest than usual. She still did her homework, though she sometimes struggled to complete assignments that would have been easy for her to do just a few weeks earlier. The changes were subtle, that they could be explained away, at least initially. But as March progressed, Cara's condition began to worsen more noticeably. She was losing weight. Her skin began to take a pale, almost grayish color. Her energy levels dropped significantly, and she spent more and more time resting in her bedroom. Still, the progression was gradual enough that it didn't trigger immediate alarm bells for her parents. Now, it's important to understand that diabetic keto acid doesn't always present in the same way or follow the same timeline in every patient. Medical literature shows that even trained professionals sometimes struggle to diagnose the condition, particularly in children who may not articulate the symptoms clearly. The fact that the Newmans, who had no medical training, failed to recognize the severity of their daughter's condition is not exactly surprising, and the family's decision to avoid conventional medicine meant they had no baseline relationship with a pediatrician who might have caught the warning signs earlier. They had no regular checkups where a doctor might have noticed Cara's weight loss or other concerning symptoms. They were essentially flying blind, relying on their own observations and their faith to guide them through what they believed was a temporary illness. So, by Friday, March 21st, 2008, Cara's condition had deteriorated significantly, though the full extent of her illness wasn't yet apparent. She was too tired to finish her homework that evening, something that would have been highly unusual for a typically diligent student. And instead of eating dinner with the family, she took her meal to her bedroom, another sign something was seriously wrong. Saturday morning brought what seemed like a small mercy. Cara asked if she could stay home from work at the family's coffee shop. Her parents agreed. Dale stayed home to work on the family's taxes, while Leilani went to the shop to handle the day's business. This decision meant Dale was present to observe Cara's condition throughout the day, though he later testified she spent most of Saturday sleeping. Now, when Leilani returned home that afternoon, she immediately knew something was terribly wrong. Cara was pale, almost ghostly in appearance. Her legs had taken on a disturbing blue tint. She appeared to have lost even more weight, and her breathing seemed labored. The sight was alarming enough that Leilani immediately called for Dale to come and see their daughter. This was the moment when the Newmans first truly grasped the severity of their daughter's condition. Up until this point, they had been able to rationalize her symptoms as part of a normal childhood illness. But seeing Cara in this state, they knew they were facing something far more serious than a simple flu. Their response was immediate, and given their beliefs entirely predictable. They began rubbing Cara's legs to try to improve her circulation and started praying over her. In their worldview, this was the most powerful and appropriate response to any health crisis. They believed that prayer could accomplish what no medicine could, and that their faith, if strong enough, would be sufficient to heal their daughter. But the Newmans also recognized they needed help. So at 5 p.m. on Saturday, Dale sent out a mass email to like-minded believers with the subject line, "Help, our daughter needs emergency prayer." The message read, "We need agreement in prayer over our youngest daughter, who is very weak and pale at the moment without any strength." And this email reveals several important things about the Newmans' mindset at this moment. First, they understood Cara's condition was serious, and the use of the word emergency and multiple exclamation points suggests genuine panic and desperation. Second, they believed the solution lay not in medical intervention, but in mobilizing their religious community to pray collectively for Cara's healing. The response to Dale's email was swift. Friends and family members began calling the Newman home, offering prayers and support. Some suggested that they should consider taking Cara to a doctor, but these suggestions were politely declined. When Cara's grandmother specifically recommended medical attention, Leilani's response was, "No, she'll be fine. God will heal her." And as Saturday evening approached, Cara's condition got worse. When the family gathered for dinner, she remained in bed, too weak to join them. At one point, she attempted to use the bathroom but collapsed, falling off the toilet. Dale had to carry her to the living room couch where the family could keep a closer eye on her. The family spent Saturday night in prayer around Cara's bedside. Friends and relatives came to the house to join in the prayers, creating an atmosphere of an intense spiritual force. In their minds, they were engaged in spiritual warfare, fighting for Cara's life through the power of collective prayer and faith. By the time the family went to sleep in the early hours of Sunday morning, Cara had lost the ability to walk or talk. Her brother Luke would later testify that he believed she was already in a coma by this point. The little girl, who had been helping at the family coffee shop just days earlier, was now lying unconscious on the living room couch, her breathing shallow and labored. So, Sunday morning, March 23rd, 2008, dawned with no improvement in Cara's condition. When Dale woke up around 5 a.m., he found his daughter pale, limp, and unresponsive. She would occasionally moan when family members called her name, but she showed no other signs of consciousness. Her breathing was less labored than it had been the night before. The family interpreted this as a positive sign, though in reality it may have indicated that her body was beginning to shut down. Throughout Sunday morning, Leilani continued making phone calls to friends and relatives, updating them on Cara's condition and requesting continued prayers. Various people came to the house to join in prayer vigil, and witnesses would later testify everyone present felt a sense of peace and didn't perceive any immediate danger to Cara's life. This collective sense of calm is one of the most puzzling aspects of this case. Like, how did you not see she needed medical help? She was in a coma-like state, but the adults around her maintained they felt no sense of urgency or alarm. Dale himself would later testify that death never crossed his mind, and that even after Cara died, he expected Jesus to bring her back to life, just as he had done with Lazarus in the Bible. The family did attempt some basic care for their unconscious daughter. Leilani tried to give Cara soup and water using a syringe, but the liquid simply dribbled out of her mouth. Dale attempted to sit her up, but she was unable to support herself. At one point, Cara involuntarily urinated on herself. So the family carried her upstairs, gave her a quick sponge bath while she lay on the floor. And these efforts, while well-intentioned, highlight the family's complete lack of understanding about Cara's condition. A child in diabetic keto acid requires immediate intensive medical intervention, including fluids, insulin, and careful monitoring of blood chemistry. The home remedies the Newmans were attempting were just not adequate enough. They were potentially dangerous for someone in Cara's condition. On the Sunday, Cara's grandmother suggested giving her Pedialyte to help maintain proper fluid balance. And this was actually good advice that might have provided some relief for Cara's dehydration, but Leilani rejected the suggestion, saying that this would take away the glory of God. And this response reveals the depth of the Newmans' commitment to their beliefs, even in the face of their daughter's distress. In their worldview, any intervention other than prayer represented a lack of faith and could actually interfere with God's healing power. They had convinced themselves that the more they relied solely on prayer, the more likely it was that God would intervene. So, around 1 p.m. on the Sunday, friends Althea and Randall arrived at the Newman home. They were part of the same religious community. They were deeply alarmed by what they saw. Cara was clearly in a critical condition, completely unresponsive and barely breathing, her eyes partially open, but she showed no awareness of her surroundings. Randall pulled Dale aside and told him directly if this was his daughter, he would take her to the hospital. And Dale's response was telling. He admitted it did cross his mind, and that he even suggested this to Leilani. She believed Cara's illness was a test of their family's faith, and that God would heal her if they remained steadfast in their beliefs. This conversation reveals the dynamic within the Newman home. While both parents were committed to their faith, Dale seemed to have some doubts about whether they were doing enough for their daughter. Leilani, on the other hand, appeared to be the driving force behind the decision to rely solely on prayer, viewing any wavering in their approach as a spiritual failure. And during this same conversation, Althea noticed a distinct twitch from Cara's mouth. Thinking Cara might have stopped breathing, Randall immediately called 911. And unknown to those in the house, emergency services were already on the way. So, when police and emergency medical personnel arrived, at approximately 2:30 p.m., they found a scene that would haunt them for years to come. The parents were still praying over their daughter, who was lying motionless on the couch. Cara was extremely thin, almost skeletal in appearance, with a bluish-grey skin color that indicated severe oxygen deprivation. Her pulse was so weak it was barely detectable. The paramedics immediately began emergency treatment and transported Cara to the hospital. But it was already too late. In the ambulance, they noticed a distinctive fruity odor on her breath, a classic sign of diabetic keto acid. This occurs when the body produces ketones as it breaks down fat for energy. They attempted to measure her blood sugar level, but it was so high that their monitoring equipment couldn't provide a reading. At the hospital, medical staff worked frantically to save Cara's life, but the damage was too extensive. She was pronounced dead 3:30 p.m., Sunday, March 23, 2008. The official cause of death was diabetic keto acid resulting from untreated type 1 diabetes. The emergency room doctor who examined Cara described her as cathetic, a medical term typically used to describe cancer patients who have become severely malnourished and wasted away. Her appearance was so shocking that medical personnel initially had difficulty believing she was only 11. Her pelvic bones, eye sockets, cheekbones, and ribs were all prominently visible through her skin. And perhaps most tragically, medical experts would later testify Cara's condition was entirely treatable. A pediatric endocrinologist explained that diabetic keto acid when caught in time, has a survival rate of 99.8%. Even children who arrive at the hospital in critical condition, as long as they still have a heartbeat and are still breathing. The doctor testified that Kara's chances of survival remained high until well into the day of her death. This means that even on the Sunday morning, when she was already unconscious, prompt medical intervention could almost certainly have saved her life. The window of opportunity had been open for days, if not weeks, but the family's commitment to faith healing had prevented them from seeking the help their daughter needed. So, the death of an 11-year-old child under such circumstances immediately triggered a criminal investigation. Law enforcement officials had to grapple with a complex set of questions about religious freedom, parental rights, and the state's obligation to protect children from harm. Wisconsin, like many states, had what's known as a treatment through prayer provision in its child abuse statutes. This law states that a person is not guilty of child abuse solely because he or she provides the child with treatment by spiritual means through prayer for healing in accordance with the religious method of healing. This provision has been included in Wisconsin law as part of a broader national movement to accommodate religious beliefs about faith healing. Supporters argued that parents should have the right to make medical decisions for their children based on their sincere religious convictions. Critics contended that such laws prioritize parental religious freedom over the children's fundamental right to life and health. And the existence of this prayer treatment provision complicated the legal analysis in Kara's case. If the Newmans were protected by this statute, they couldn't be prosecuted for child abuse, even if their decision to rely on prayer instead of medicine had contributed to their daughter's death. It's an interesting dilemma, right? However, prosecutors determined that the prayer treatment provision didn't protect them at all. While they might be immune from child abuse prosecution, they could still be held accountable under other statutes that did not contain similar religious exemptions. And after careful consideration, the district attorney's office decided to charge both Dale and Leilani with second-degree reckless homicide. It was a crime to recklessly cause the death of another human being, and there was no religious exemption. The decision to pursue reckless charges rather than child neglect was significant. See, child neglect charges would have required prosecutors to prove that the parents intentionally contributed to the daughter's neglect, a higher standard that might have been difficult to meet given their sincere religious beliefs. Reckless homicide, however, required only that they acted recklessly by creating an unreasonable and substantial risk of death or great bodily harm while being aware of that risk. The charges were announced in May 2008, about 2 months after Kara's death. The decision to prosecute the Newmans was controversial from the beginning, dividing the community and attracting national attention. Supporters of the prosecution argued parents couldn't be allowed to let the children die in the name of religious freedom. Critics contended that the state was persecuting a grieving family for their sincere religious beliefs. Comment, what do you think? So, the Newmans were tried separately, with Leilani's trial taking place in the spring of 2009. The prosecution's case was straightforward. They had a legal duty as parents to provide medical care for their daughter. They were aware that she was seriously ill and in need of medical attention, and their failure to seek treatment had directly caused her death. The defense strategy was a bit more complex. The Newman's attorneys did not dispute the basic facts of what happened. They argued that their client's sincere religious beliefs should be taken into account when determining their criminal culpability. They contended that the Newmans generally believed prayer was more effective than medicine, and that this belief affected their ability to perceive the risk their daughter was facing. The defense also argued the jury instruction should specifically address how the defendant's religious beliefs related to the legal standard for reckless homicide. They wanted the jury to understand that if the Newmans sincerely believed prayer was the best treatment for their daughter, they couldn't simultaneously be aware that their conduct was creating an unreasonable risk of death or great bodily harm. In other words, they're so fucking dumb they couldn't tell the difference. I mean, it has to be said, right? The prosecution countered that religious belief, no matter how sincere, could not excuse parents from their fundamental duty to protect their children's lives. They argued that the Newmans were clearly aware their daughter was in serious condition, as evidenced by their urgent email requesting emergency prayers, and that any reasonable parent would have sought medical attention under those circumstances. Now, the trial featured emotional testimony from family members, friends, and medical experts. Kara's siblings testified about her sister's final days, describing how she had gradually become weaker and less responsive. Althea and Randall also testified about their visit to the home and their unsuccessful attempts to convince the parents to seek medical help. Medical experts explained the progression of diabetic keto acid and testified about how the treatable condition was with proper medical intervention. And this testimony was particularly powerful because it demonstrated that Kara's death had been entirely preventable. The Newmans themselves testified in their own defense, explaining their religious beliefs and their genuine conviction that prayer was the most appropriate response to their daughter's illness. Their testimony was heartbreaking, revealing parents who were clearly devastated with their daughter's death but remained convinced what they did was the right thing to do. Dale testified that he had never considered the possibility Kara might die, and that even after her death, he expected God to bring her back. This testimony highlighted the depth of the religious convictions, but also suggested a level of detachment from reality. So, Leilani was convicted on May the 22nd, 2009, after a jury deliberated for 3 hours. Dale's trial began 2 months later. His case was complicated by the fact his jury was informed about his wife's prior conviction, a decision that was made to ensure all jurors had the same information rather than risk some knowing about it and others not. Dale was also convicted. Both parents were sentenced to 180 days in jail, 10 years of probation. The sentences were structured so that each parent would serve 30 days in jail each year for 6 years. 30 days a year. I've slept longer than 30 days. But this was because one parent would always be available to care for the surviving children. Now, the Newmans appealed their conviction, raising several arguments about why their case should be overturned. Their primary argument was that the Wisconsin statutes were too vague to provide adequate notice about when parental reliance on prayer treatment became criminal. They contended that the existence of the prayer treatment provision in the child abuse statute created confusion about whether their conduct was legal or illegal. The defense also argued that the trial court had given improper jury instructions, particularly regarding the parents' duty to provide medical care and the relationship between their religious beliefs and the legal standard for reckless homicide. They claimed that the instructions had prevented the jury from properly considering how their religious beliefs affected their awareness, the risk to their daughter. Additionally, Dale argued that his jury had been improperly biased by being informed of his wife's prior conviction for the same crime. He contended this information made it impossible for jurors to fairly evaluate his case on its merits. No, you moron, you committed the exact same crime. Doesn't matter if they knew about your wife's conviction. So, the Wisconsin Court of Appeals heard the case and issued a detailed decision in 2013. The court rejected the vagueness challenge, finding that the statutes provided adequate notice that parents could be held criminally responsible if their child died as a result of their failure to provide medical care. The court also rejected the jury instruction challenges, finding that the instructions adequately conveyed the legal standards, and that the defendants weren't entitled to special instructions about how their religious beliefs should be considered. The court noted that while religious beliefs might be relevant to determining a defendant's subjective awareness of risk, it couldn't excuse parents from their fundamental duty to protect their children. And regarding the jury bias in Dale's case, the court found that the trial judge had properly handled the situation by ensuring all jurors were informed of the wife's conviction and instructing them to consider only the evidence presented in Dale's trial. And then the Wisconsin Supreme Court declined to review the case allowing the Court of Appeal's decision to stand. The Newman's convictions were final and they began serving the sentences as ordered. So, why did the parents do what they did? It's because they misunderstood the point of religion. See, everything is in control by God. The outcome is something God controls. The point of religion is during moments, are you going to stick to the principles God gave you? You don't have to believe in God. I'm trying to make you understand the thought process. So for example, you could lose your job, right? You could lose your parent. Your child could die. During these moments, are you going to stick to the principles God gave you? And in this story, the principles are, yes, pray to God. Yes, believe in God. At the same time, take care of your child. Take it to the doctors. Take it to the hospital. For example, my daughter is nearly 2. She has severe global delays. She can't walk yet. And she's not really talking. I pray every day to God. I do anyway, but particularly I'm asking God, please have her develop. At the same time, I've got 2 physical therapist specialists that she's seeing. I have all the equipment in the house, special chairs, walking instruments, and different exercises that we do with her. And I've spoken to early intervention, medical personnel, etc. You see how the 2 go hand in hand? I'm asking God, look, yes, I believe in you. I'm loyal to you. Please help her. At the same time, I am striving for her improvement. You see how they go hand in hand? Where religion can get a bad rep is where a person just goes far extreme. This to me was an extreme case. If I see my child, pale, thin, sick, he and she are going straight to the hospital. And while they're in the hospital, I'll pray. Do you understand? Right? This girl must have been in agony. You know something? I'm not a Christian, but I have a lot of respect for Christianity. This is not Christianity. Jesus is one of the greatest men to ever live. This is not what Christianity stands for. So in my opinion, 30 days a month? What a load of bollocks. They should have got worse. Comment, tell me what you think. In the early hours of May the 12th, 2011, Hana Williams telephoned her husband, Larry, as he drove home from work. Carrie told him that she had found their daughter, Hana, lying face down in the backyard and unconscious. After instructing Carrie to call 911, Larry raced home and performed CPR until the medics arrived and transported Hana to the hospital. Hana was pronounced dead at 1:30 a.m. on May the 12th, 2011. A subsequent investigation revealed that Carrie and Larry routinely, physically and psychologically punished Hana. They also punished Emmanuel, both of whom they had adopted from Ethiopia in 2008. Now, Dr. Daniel Seelove, the forensic pathologist who performed Hana's autopsy, noticed that Hana had visible injuries on her pelvis, elbows, knees, and calves. She had bruises on her knees, eyebrow, and upper pelvis, and multiple impact marks on her thighs and calves. He determined that when she died, Hana suffered from severe malnutrition, with an abnormally thin body and protruding ribs and shoulder blades. Dr. Seelove identified Hana's cause of death as hypothermia, with malnutrition and a bacterial infection in her stomach. Now, the Child Protective Services, or the CPS, they interviewed Emmanuel, they interviewed Larry and Carrie, and also their 7 biological children. The children revealed that Carrie and Larry had regularly abused Emmanuel and Hana, causing scars. They had denied them food and forced them to eat sandwiches soaked in water. They were also forced to eat frozen, uncooked vegetables while sitting outside on the back porch away from the family. And they forced Hana and Emmanuel to sleep in a locked closet or shower room. The Williams children described their parents' chosen methods of punishing Hana physically and psychologically for what they called her disobedient behavior. One witness saw Carrie abuse Hana with switches at least once every day in the last 6 months of her life. Hana's elder brother Jacob testified that the intent of this corporal punishment was to inflict pain. Now, when Hana first arrived from Ethiopia, she slept in a bedroom with her sisters. When Carrie and Larry caught Hana stealing food, they forced her to sleep outside in a barn. For a 2-week period in the fall of 2010, they locked Hana in a shower room at night without access to a toilet. Now, Carrie and Larry used a plastic plumbing tube and glue stick. This is what they refer to as switches. Hana was also stuffed in a small closet at times. Now, this closet measured 2 feet by 4 feet. Hana was 5 feet tall, and she had no ability to turn on the light while inside because the switch was on the outside of this closet. Moreover, Carrie forced Hana to stay in the closet all day if she refused to follow Carrie's instructions to go outside. Now, one of Carrie's younger sons testified that Hana was locked in the closet for up to 24 hours at a time. When Carrie locked Hana inside the closet during the daytime, she played an audiobook of the Bible because Carrie was trying to get Hana's brain to think differently. If you want your child to be more religious, you don't force it into them, you moron. Larry and Carrie also made Hana use an outhouse behind the barn and wash her hands and shower outside in the backyard, and would not permit her to use any of the 3 indoor bathrooms in the home. Carrie began imposing this punishment in the summer of 2010 because Hana suffered from a blood-borne disease. Carrie regularly escorted Hana to and from the backyard outhouse, which Hana was the only child forced to use. Emmanuel was unsure why Larry and Carrie would hose Hana off in the backyard with cold water, but he could see that she wasn't comfortable when being hosed down. Carrie also decided at one point to cut off all of Hana's hair in punishment for having cut the grass too short. You cut the grass, so I'm going to cut your hair? What? The Williamses, Carrie and Larry, also used food deprivation as a form of punishment. They forced Hana and Emmanuel to miss meals, with Hana sometimes being denied any food for 2 consecutive days. When they did provide food to eat, they required Hana and Emmanuel to eat separately from the rest of the family. The parents forced both Hana and Emmanuel to eat on the floor, in another room, or outside, when the rest of the family ate at the dining table. Carrie often required Hana to eat her meals in the locked closet. In the last few months of Hana's life, Carrie and Larry forced both Hana and Emmanuel to eat their meals outside for what Carrie described as mealtime oppositionality. What the fuck does that mean? Moreover, when Hana and Emmanuel received meals, they were not fed the same food as the other children. Instead, the lunch sandwiches that Hana and Emmanuel received had been soaked in water by either Larry, Carrie, or one of the other children. Carrie testified that the children were fed these wet sandwiches because Hana and Emmanuel refused to cooperate at the meal table. That doesn't mean you go and wet their sandwiches, you wet wipe. Dinner time was no different. Carrie usually served Hana and Emmanuel cold leftovers topped with undefrosted frozen vegetables. You see, Hana went from a weight of 108 pounds and a BMI of 23, this was back in 2009, she went from that to 78 pounds and a BMI of less than 16, which signified severe malnutrition. Carrie's physical punishment followed Hana to the backyard. Carrie forced Hana to engage in punishments she and the children called walking the line and boot camp. You see, walking the line involved forcing Hana to walk the perimeter of an outdoor pickleball court in the backyard. Boot camp itself involved extra chores, usually outdoors, and sometimes involved stacking and restacking the same pile of rocks. Hana underwent boot camp at least once or twice a week in the last 6 months of her life. Now, regarding the incident of her death on May the 11th, 2011, it began as a typical day for the Williamses. While the children emerged from their bedrooms, Carrie let Hana out of the locked closet. Then Larry, with the other children's assistance, prepared breakfast around 10 a.m. Given that Larry admitted that Hana ate breakfast outside, she likely ate her breakfast outside that morning. After breakfast, the children cleaned up the kitchen, did their chores, and went outside to play. The children recall playing Capture the Flag that morning. Hana, who was wearing a t-shirt and sweatpants, was outside but did not participate. Larry left for work around noon. The children typically ate lunch between 2 or 3 p.m. Carrie escorted Hana to the outhouse before lunch. She then gave Hana her lunch, again probably a wet sandwich, around 3 p.m. Although Carrie initially denied forcing Hana to remain outside as punishment that day, she admitted she forced Hana to eat outside for disobedience being oppositional. And one of Carrie's sons confirmed that Hana was required to stay outside all day as punishment. There was also testimony that Carrie refused to let Hana remain indoors when she was menstruating. Carrie testified that around 4 p.m. she told Hana to come back inside, presumably to do her schoolwork, but that Hana would not comply. Carrie saw Hana remove her shoes and stand at the back door. Carrie shut the door on Hana. Carrie testified that initially she checked on Hana every 5 to 10 minutes after Hana refused to come inside after lunch. She saw Hana put her shoes back on, but had no recollection of what Hana did between 4:30 and 6 p.m. when Carrie again walked Hana to the outhouse. Carrie claimed she again told Hana to come inside and Hana again refused. By that time, it had started to drizzle outside. Carrie escorted Hana to the outhouse a third time around 8:30 p.m. But this time, Carrie saw Hana throw herself on the ground. She testified that Hana took a few steps and lunged forward, landing on her hands and knees. She further testified that Hana did this repeatedly before and after using the outhouse. At that point, Carrie chose to leave Hana outside because she couldn't watch it anymore. After Carrie returned inside, she saw Hana continue to throw herself around for another 20 to 30 minutes. One of Carrie's sons testified that he observed Hana's odd behavior as well. Carrie noticed by this time that Hana had skinned her elbows and knees and had a knot on her forehead. Carrie claims she sent her oldest son Joshua outside to bring Hana inside. Hana began exercising as Joshua instructed, but when she stopped, Carrie sent her next eldest son Jacob to do the same thing. Jacob testified that he abused Hana and ordered her to do sit squats. Again, Hana complied for about a minute and then stopped. Finally, Carrie sent her third eldest son outside to repeat the abuse. Carrie admitted that she wanted Hana to do exercises to keep warm. Dr. Seeler testified that when he conducted Hana's autopsy, he observed marks on Hana's left thigh, where she had been struck by a long, narrow object, such as a strap or switch, at least 4 times, with sufficient force to cause her blood vessels to burst. He found 10 similar pattern bruises on Hana's lower calves. Carrie claimed that she then took Hana her dinner outside. Carrie said Hana did not eat the food. Hana brought the fork to her mouth as if she was going to take a bite and then put the fork back. In a written statement to police, one of Carrie's sons said that Hana was leaning over the table and was unable to eat. After 5 minutes, Carrie took Hana's dinner plate away and moved it into the house. Carrie said at some point she attempted to carry Hana inside, but Hana went limp. She then ordered Jacob and Joshua to carry Hana inside. Carrie told the boys to first don latex gloves and to remove Hana's shoes and socks because they were soggy from dripping water and Hana's blood. Carrie said Hana was so bloody and her clothes so wet from walking in the rain that the water dripping down had made the blood drip down all over her soft, scented shoes, and she wanted them removed before Hana came inside. Joshua complied, removing Hana's shoes and socks and throwing them in the garbage. Now Jacob testified that when Joshua returned to the back porch, Hana started taking off her clothes. Carrie went outside and saw Hana sitting buck naked from the waist down. Carrie told her sons to go back inside and to forget it because modesty is important in our family. Modesty over nutrition, eh? Carrie took a set of dry clothes to Hana, told her to get out of her wet clothes, returned back inside, and turned the patio light off, leaving Hana in the dark. Carrie testified that she checked on Hana twice, turning on and off the patio light each time. At some point, she thought Hana had begun changing her clothes, but Carrie was busy with her other children, so she instructed one of them to check on Hana. This child testified that she checked on Hana every 15 minutes and saw that Hana continued to remove more clothing until she was naked. Like Carrie, her child turned on and off the light every time she checked on Hana. Hana apparently remained outside in the dark, bloody, wet, cold, and naked for at least 2 hours. Now around midnight, Larry called Carrie to let her know that his van pool had dropped him off at the park and ride and that he was on the way home. When Carrie told Larry about her perception of Hana's behavior, Jacob overheard them arguing about whether Hana was really falling down on purpose. Larry was not at all surprised by Carrie's description of Hana's behavior. The kids next saw Hana face down on the back patio. They told Carrie, who went outside, to find Hana with her face halfway on the concrete and half on the glass, and her mouth full of dirt from having her face fall onto a molehill just off the patio. Hana was cold to her touch. Carrie rolled her over and could see that it wasn't good. She ran inside to grab a sheet from the linen closet to cover Hana, and then tried to carry her inside. When Carrie realized they could not carry Hana, Carrie enlisted Joshua's help. Joshua came outside and carried Hana inside. Once Hana was inside, neither Carrie nor Joshua could find a pulse. This is when they called 911, and the operator directed Carrie to perform CPR. When Larry arrived, thereafter, he and Carrie took turns to administer CPR until the medics arrived. Now, when Skagit County Sheriff Deputy Chad Clark arrived, he saw a large lump on Hana's forehead. Pictures taken of Hana's body showed her contusions, abrasions, and dirt above her eye and in her nostrils. Hana was transported to the Valley Hospital where Dr. Jeanette Tomlinson pronounced her dead at 1:30 a.m. on May the 12th, 2011. Now, Dr. Tomlinson did a full examination of Hana's body and also saw contusions on her forehead, bruises and abrasions on her hips, knees and shins, and red streaks on her thighs. Carrie told Dr. Tomlinson that Hana had been face planting outside that night. She found this version of events odd, given that it would be inconsistent with the normal human reflexive response to a fall. The state's experts testified that Hana's behavior before can be explained by the fact that she was so severely malnourished. Dr. Weston testified that starvation causes distress and anxiety in a child, leading the child to steal food, to exhibit abnormal behaviors around food, and to engage in defiant behaviors in general. And in all of this, you keep asking yourself, why treat the child this way? Who knows? Now, Dr. Francis Chalmers, a pediatric medical consultant for the state, testified that when a body lacks adequate fuel in the form of calories, it starts using body tissue as energy. This can result in behavioral changes, fatigue, and serious cardiac arrhythmia. Both Dr. Chalmers and Dr. Weston testified that a child as emaciated as Hana would be more susceptible to hypothermia because she would have insufficient insulating fat under the skin to keep the body warm in a cool environment. And Dr. Weston noted that people suffering from hypothermia exhibit erratic physical movements, such as stumbling or having difficulty walking, and irrational behavior from an altered mental status. Dr. Seelove noted hypothermia victims often have a false sensation that they are warm and engage in paradoxical undressing, which would explain her behavior on the patio, meaning they remove their clothing even though one would expect them not to be in that situation. An individual suffering from severe hypothermia will lapse into a coma. In fact, it was revealed that Carrie complained to her knitting club friends that if Hana would not eat what was put in front of her, then she would not eat at all. Carrie denied Hana food or made the food unpalatable to eat and forced her to eat in a way from the rest of the family. She testified Hana began stealing food about a year before her death, and Carrie said Hana lied about stealing when confronted. Well then, stop starving her, you muppet. Carrie told friends that Hana was a liar who rifled through everyone's belongings and stole from them. Carrie locked Hana in the shower room and then the closet to keep her from hoarding or gorging on sweets. When one of her friends suggested she return Hana to the adoption agency, her response was, "I don't wish her on anyone." Wow. During the trial, Larry Williams himself turned on his wife and blamed her for the child's death. Larry said through his attorney that his wife should spend decades in jail because she was the primary actor. In fact, a foster mother who adopted Emmanuel after all this abuse testified during the trial. This new foster mother, she said Emmanuel was really thin and covered in scratches when she took him in. According to the foster mother, the child was so emaciated that his ribs were showing through his skin. After the arrests, Emmanuel and the other biological children were placed in foster care or with relatives. So, to conclude on this story, Carrie was sentenced to the maximum of nearly 37 years in the death of Hana. Larry was given an exceptional sentence of nearly 28 years. And the question you gotta ask is, all for what? For what? Why? Why? Look at how many children you got. You're an experienced parent. If the child pisses you off, it's okay. That's what they do. Starve them, abuse them, lock them in a closet, throw them outside. What the hell? 37 years, not enough. 28 years, I've slept longer than 28 years. Anyway, comment, tell me what you think.